Something I never expected to see that came up in the last few days is that the GPDA, the Grand Prix Drivers Association, is now on social media. And then in the days after that, they started posting bits and pieces to basically say that they're not going to have a war with the FIA, but sort of let the FIA know that they will have one if they need to. All of this has come off the back of the recent row between Mohammed bin Sulayem, the president of the FIA, and the drivers, over a request that the drivers will no longer swear over the radios, nor should they be swearing in the press conferences, which is something that has caused chaos for a number of reasons. Number one being that Max Verstappen was given the FIA's version of community service for swearing in a press conference, while Charles Leclerc was given a fine for the same thing. While there are claims that this is yet another crusade against Max, Charles did immediately apologise for his use of a swear word in the press conference, so that was mitigating circumstances. Or it might be mitigating circumstances. Look, this is just what happened, don't shoot the messenger. And as Scott Mitchell-Malm wrote the other day, the drivers are, on the whole, okay with the whole principle of swearing less. There are other factors at play here, such as various cultural aspects, such as the Dutch and the Danish being quite chill with these kinds of words. Here in the UK, we basically say no swearing until 9 PM on television, and the TV show The In-Betweeners is probably the most accurate depiction of how people in the UK, particularly young men, talk to each other. Meanwhile, over in the United States, Jack Bauer is allowed to torture somebody, or in Law and Order SVU, they're allowed to mention gruesome things done to women and children, but using the F word, that's a big no-no. John Mulaney did a routine that is basically what I've just mentioned. I've basically just paraphrased John Mulaney and added a couple of extra bits, but the point remains the same. You get these really gruesome crimes on Law and Order being described at 3 in the afternoon. Buy iced tea. Moving on, the Race's article talks about how there are differing attitudes to these words. Some view them as just, well, words. Others, as became evident on my previous video on this subject's comment section, see them as words that should never be used. And there were some comments on that video having this holier-than-thou outlook on it because people who swear have a limited vocabulary and things like that. If you don't swear, fine. Well, I do. And lots of other people do. You're not better than them. And as Eminem once said, Will Smith hasn't got to cuss in his raps to sell records. Well, I do, so f*** him and f*** you too. But the general overview of the current battles in inverted commas between the FIA and the drivers is because these things have been interpreted as being a very heavy-handed approach that do seem to target individual drivers, which has led to the drivers in turn starting to take the piss with things. Karun Chandhok recently stated that the whole swearing thing probably isn't the biggest issue the sport has right now, and in a way, he's absolutely right. Because I've just seen on Autosport that Stefano Domenicali is, in his own words, close to putting some European rounds of the F1 calendar on rotation so that everybody can be fit in. And if the F1 world loses Spa every 2 years, or Silverstone, or Hungary, or Monza, there's going to be chaos online. So what is the GPDA, and what have they said? Good question. The GPDA was formed back in the early 1960s to allow the drivers to have one big collective voice. It's effectively the drivers' union, and they use the group to push for things to be changed, because all of them suggesting something is better than just one person suggesting something. The FIA can take on one driver pretty easily, but all of them? That's a bit trickier. And other sports have their own unions for the competitors as well. The Professional Footballers Association is the union of football players in England. There's a similar union in cricket, ice hockey, rugby, there's one for Olympians, there's one in cycling and other sports. There was an attempt at one being set up in the WWE, then the World Wrestling Federation, by Jesse Ventura. It was basically to protect the health of the wrestlers because their schedule back then was like 7 days a week, 350 days of the year. And this was close to going through until Hulk Hogan went to Vince McMahon and said, "They're trying to unionize against you, brother." And Vince didn't particularly like that, so the whole thing was shut down, and Jesse Ventura's had a grudge against Hulk Hogan ever since. Don't try to tell him it didn't happen, he was there, etc. He lives on the Baja now. The first chairman of this union was Sterling Moss, the GPDA that is, not the WWE thing, and when he retired, Joe Bonnier took over. The most famous member of the group is probably Jackie Stewart, who rallied the drivers round to try and reduce any unnecessary deaths in Formula 1. Basically, he wanted the sport to be organised in such a way that if there were trees by the track, they would either get rid of those trees or put barriers in front of the trees so they became harder to hit if something went wrong. The Union then boycotted the German Grand Prix in 1969 and the Belgian Grand Prix in 1970, leading to the Spa circuit changing from the 8-mile death trap it was into what we have today. The GPDA's other big moment was the strike of 1982, this being when Jean-Marie Balestri, the then president of the FIA, told the drivers that their super licenses were connected to their contracts. Niki Lauda and Didier Pironi led a strike where they ended up all sleeping in the ballroom of a hotel in South Africa, but the Grand Prix eventually went ahead, with the drivers involved in the strike being fined and given suspended race bans. However, the fines got reduced after the Court of Appeal stepped in, after which the GPDA was disbanded. It was resurrected on the 13th of May 1994 when Michael Schumacher, Niki Lauda, Christian Fittipaldi and Gerhard Berger all got together to bring the union back, all of this being done in the wake of what happened at Imola that year. Like with pretty much any union, you don't have to be a member, but it sure helps. In the 2013 season, all of the drivers except for Raikkonen, Suttil and Bottas were members, and other drivers have relinquished their memberships over the years and then come back for whatever reasons. I think all the drivers are members at the time of writing, with the drivers all meeting up at the Saudi Grand Prix, was it last year, to discuss how they were going to proceed with the whole missiles hitting oil refineries close to the track thing. Since 2014, the chairman of the group has been Alex Wurz, and previous chairmen have included Rubens Barrichello, Pedro de la Rosa, Ralph and Michael Schumacher, David Coulthard, and obviously Jackie Stewart. Since 1996, there has also been a director, and from 1996 to 2005, the Michael held both positions, but there has been more than one director on occasion, such as between 1996 and 1998 when Damon Hill was a director, and David Coulthard was a director between 1996 and 2006, along with Michael. Other chairmen have, since 2010, been Alonso, Heusinkveld, Massa, Vettel, Barrichello, Button, Grosjean, and then the current chairman, George Russell, who began his time as chairman in 2021. It has to be said that George is chairman along with Anastasia Fowl, who is their legal advisor, and she's the only non-driver to ever be involved with the group. So hopefully that's explained what this whole thing is about. So let's move on to the statement that was posted and quite possibly written by George, Alex, and Anastasia. As is the case with every sport, competitors must abide by the referee's decision, whether they like it or not, indeed whether they agree with it or not. That is how sport works. The drivers, our members, are no different and fully understand that. Our members are professional drivers, racing in Formula 1, the pinnacle of international motorsport. They are the gladiators, and every racing weekend they put on a great show for the fans. With regards to swearing, there is a difference between swearing intended to insult others and more casual swearing, such as you might use to describe bad weather or indeed an inanimate object such as a Formula 1 car or a driving situation. We urge the FIA president to also consider his own tone and language when talking to our member drivers, or indeed about them, whether in a public forum or otherwise. Further, our members are adults. They do not need to be given instructions via the media about matters as trivial as the wearing of jewellery and underpants. The GPDA has, on countless occasions, expressed its view that driver monetary fines are not appropriate for our sport. For the past 3 years, we have called upon the FIA president to share the details and strategy regarding how the FIA's financial fines are allocated and where the funds are spent. We have also relayed our concerns about the negative image financial fines bring to the sport. We once again request that the FIA president provides financial transparency and direct, open dialogue with us. All stakeholders, FIA, F1, the teams and the GPDA, should jointly determine how and where the money is spent for the benefit of our sport. The GPDA wishes to collaborate in a constructive way with all the stakeholders, including the FIA president, in order to promote our great sport for the benefit of everyone who works in it, pays for it, watches it, and indeed loves it. We are playing our part. Best regards, the directors and chairman of the GPDA on behalf of the Grand Prix drivers. So basically, Sulliam has said, you and what army, and George, Alex and Anastasia have gone, this one. Sulliam's approach to things, and given the reaction to certain policies he wants to implement, appear to be done by telling the media first and the drivers finding out much later, or through the media. As such, as already mentioned, Max decided to take the piss with things, swearing in an interview, getting his punishment, and then pleading the fifth every time he was asked a question at Singapore. Vettel wore his pants over his overalls on one occasion, and Hamilton went full teenager in a PE lesson saying, "Oh, I can't take this out, sir, I've just had it done and it's going to heal up," with regards to his jewellery at Miami. And while jewellery can be considered a safety hazard, particularly with things like fire and maybe getting in the way while they're trying to cut off bits of clothing, the approach to it has been quite heavy-handed and has often carried elements of singling out one particular driver. Using phrases such as "we are not rappers" doesn't help either. And as someone pointed out in a comment section, the likes of Jean Todt and Max Mosley were either invisible or they were seen out and about and then gave a couple of speeches to a camera, but even then, they only really said anything when something needed to be said. Soleim, on the other hand, seems to constantly be either in front of a camera or having his words printed. And as somebody else said on a comment section going by the name of Just Another Dutchie, the fact that the GPDA has had to put this out as an open letter instead of doing things privately kind of shows how bad the relationship has deteriorated recently. Mr. Dutchie notes that this could have been solved with a discussion between Soleim and the drivers in an office in Paris or Monaco or even Brazil last weekend, although the weather might have put that off a bit. There is the general agreement that there should be a certain amount of restraint shown in official interviews, because it's, well, an official setting. And in most other sports, if you swear in front of the TV cameras, whether that's to the BBC on Match of the Day, ITV for the Six Nations, the NFL, or whoever, you're likely to get into trouble. But on the field of play, of course there's going to be things said in the heat of the moment. Jude Bellingham against Wales at the World Cup springs to mind, and actually that's where you bring in the whole "if you put a microphone in front of a football player you think that everything he says will be nice" quote from Vettel. And to be honest, Bellingham proved his point with that quote, which I'm not going to say because it's pretty rude and YouTube doesn't like a certain word that got used. There was also Jill Scott in the Euros against Germany in 2022. You can take the girl out of Sunderland, but I mean, you know the rest. Time and place, I think, is the operative term to use. Out on track where everything is going a million miles an hour? Absolutely. You're going to say stuff in the heat of the moment. In an official press conference where it's all formal and there are sort of, I don't know, guidelines and regulations to follow and, you know, there's a certain behavioural standard that has to be applied. Absolutely. Don't swear in a press conference. It's actually ironic, in a way, that there's been a massive thing made about swearing through statements made by somebody who isn't swearing, which is where the watch his own tone and language part comes into things. By talking down to the drivers, by trying to police what they can and can't say in the heat of the moment or whatever, and then running to the media whenever you feel you have something to say and then using terms like "we are not rappers," it's almost like the drivers are being talked to like they're kids in a school, getting a really condescending dressing down from a teacher or head of department or head of key stage or head of year or the head teacher himself. If you went to State Comprehensive like I did, you probably had one of these dressing down moments at some point. It's the head teacher, head of year, and you're all in the assembly hall and you're getting talked to, you're getting your bollocking, and then at the end it's like, yeah, you really need to sort your behaviour out, don't you? Yeah, and oh my god, that's just... oh, that winds me up. Just... it happened too many times, as you can probably tell, but, you know, I'm sitting there, and like many other people, you might have been sat there too, going, I'm not 8 years old, just fuck off. The GPDA has also taken an interest into where exactly these fines that they are paying are going, because the money's got to go somewhere, right? The FIA makes its money through entry fees and other things like that. It doesn't operate as a business per se, but it is a good question. A driver has just paid 10 grand in fines for something that shouldn't have been said in a press conference, or was wearing a necklace in the race for religious reasons, which is actually something Gasly mentioned when the jewellery thing with Hamilton kicked off in 2022. That Gasly was religious and there were certain things he wants to wear or have in his car because of his faith. So where are those fines going? Are they going to charitable causes? Road safety initiatives? It's a good question. But everything said in that statement from the GPDA is something that ends with a direct shot back at the president, who is likely to go uncontested in the next election and could win presidency again with just a single vote. From himself. It's made that extra bit more mental when Leclerc was fined 10 grand for swearing in a press conference, while Norris got less for the whole formation lap fiasco. And saying that, Norris is actually the most fined driver this year. £47,000 for the whole season. Tsunoda is second, and Max is 19th on the list. He's only copped 800 quid. It's that Johnny Herbert again, isn't it? The total in fines for the season is somewhere in the region of just under £300,000. McLaren has picked up nearly 60 grand of that, while VCARB and Mercedes are in second and third. But the GPDA raises a valid point. Where are these fines going? It's my personal opinion that those fines should go to tracks struggling to pay the hosting fees so that they can stay on the calendar and make any necessary improvements. Formula 1 is a sport that is many expensive and the tracks drop off simply because they're being priced out. Silverstone being one of the main ones, and their ticket prices and so on get reported on every single year. The video I did on Silverstone's ticket prices this year is probably one of my most popular videos of the year. We've seen before what happens when you try to rule Formula 1 with an iron fist. You become hated by the drivers and fans alike. And when you have all the fan bases online coming out and saying you're not doing a good job, then you're really screwing up. If you can get Verstappen and Hamilton cultists to agree on something, you've messed up. Jean Todt was a pretty decent FIA president. He had an open door policy at the office, and whenever he was in, the drivers could just turn up and have a chat about what concerned them, or just drop in for a coffee. Mosley had that questionable moment in his private life in around 2006, 2007 or whenever it was, but when he became the president in 1993, after 1994 began the safest period in Formula 1 history, with so many safety things changing and making the sport, well, the safest it had ever been. On top of this, he helped bring in something called Euro NCAP, which is a crash testing program that all cars have to pass before they can be sold in Britain or the European Union. And because of Euro NCAP, the amount of fatalities on the roads dropped considerably. Things like Euro NCAP, which was partly an FIA initiative, saved thousands of lives. And the two pieces of bread in that sandwich? Balestri and Sulliam. And while I agree that swearing in a press conference should be off limits, there is no way you can police the swearing on the radios. Tell FOM not to broadcast these things if you think it's that bad, but it's all censored anyway. And it does add a little bit of colour to things where F1 has a reputation of being a bit sterile compared to what it was, 25 years ago. And one comment I saw made a very good point. The relationships between the drivers now is much closer than it was back in the day. The rivalries are confined to on-track and very rarely spill off-track in the same way that they did in the manner of Senna and Piquet, just as an example. They're all friends for the most part. They all grew up together, and if Sulliam thinks he can take them all on, he's got another thing coming. So does he swallow his pride, admit that he's done something wrong, and then try to have the talks that the GPDA wants to have? Or does he just carry on as he has been and potentially go uninterrupted through the next election cycle? But at the same time, there are reports that there are people inside the FIA that don't like the way this is going, and that might cause them to run for presidency to try and get him out, which is something interesting. So we might actually have a proper election for the FIA presidency next year. So then, a look at the letter that the GPDA wrote to the president of the FIA and how the relationship between the two groups has properly soured over the last month and a half or so. If this thing has made you think things about the thing, then like this thing so I know I did a good thing. And for more things from the channel, hit the subscribe button thing and ring the bell thing so you never miss out on any thing that I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the rad lads at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to help support me at a more personal level, a link to Patreon is in the description, along with links to Discord, socials and other bits and pieces you might want or need to know. Well, there's super thanks if you want to top up my coffee cup, and oh yeah, there was something I had to get from the shop yesterday, it was that, coffee. And there's also memberships if you want to spam Roberto Moreno emojis in the comment sections. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.